The dust-laden wind carried the scent of trouble as Olivia Lawson stepped off the train in Dodge City, Kansas, clutching a faded telegram and the last of her hope. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new life felt as substantial as the prairie mirages that danced on the horizon. She had exactly $23 to her name, a trunk full of memories she'd rather forget, and a deep conviction that love was a luxury she could no longer afford. The station was bustling with the usual array of travelers, cowboys, and townsfolk going about their business. Olivia adjusted her modest gray traveling dress, now wrinkled from the 3-day journey from Philadelphia. Her late father's pocket watch, the only item of value she hadn't sold, showed it was just past noon, and the Kansas sun beat down mercilessly, making her immediately regret the heavy fabric of her Eastern attire. "Miss, you looking for someone?" The station master's voice cut through her thoughts. "No, Olivia hesitated. "I'm here for a position at Hargrove's Mercantile." The station master raised his eyebrows slightly. "Old man Hargrove passed on 3 weeks back, miss. His nephew's running things now, but I ain't heard nothing about hiring." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. The telegram in her hand suddenly weighed as heavy as the trunk at her feet. "There must be some mistake. I was guaranteed a position. I sold everything to come here." "Sorry, miss. Times are tough all over." The station master tipped his hat and returned to his duties, leaving Olivia standing alone on the platform. She made her way to a bench and sank down, the reality of her situation crashing over her like a wave. After her father's death and the discovery of his crippling gambling debts, the creditors had taken everything. The telegram from Mr. Hargrove offering her a position in his store had seemed like divine providence. Now it was just another broken promise. "Excuse me, madam, but you look like you could use some assistance." Olivia looked up to find a man standing before her, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. When he tilted his head, the sunlight revealed features that were striking rather than conventionally handsome: a strong jaw darkened with stubble, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to stern expressions than smiles. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," she replied stiffly, years of proper upbringing preventing her from admitting otherwise. The man's eyes flickered to her trunk, then back to her face. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine." And Dodge City ain't the sort of place a lady should be sitting alone looking lost. Before Olivia could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the platform. A group of rowdy cowboys had cornered a young Chinese man, shoving him between them like a rag doll. The stranger's demeanor changed instantly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous timbre as he strode toward the disturbance. Olivia watched as he approached the group, his posture relaxed but purposeful. "That's enough," he called out, his voice carrying across the platform. The cowboys turned, expressions ranging from annoyance to outright hostility. The largest of them stepped forward. "Mind your own business, Donovan. This ain't your concern." "I'm making it my concern, Miller." The man Donovan didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made the cowboys shift uneasily. The Chinaman was trying to board the train without a ticket. One of the others complained. "I have ticket," the Chinese man protested, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. "They not look, just push." Donovan held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the Chinese man handed over the ticket. "Looks legitimate to me," Donovan said, handing it back. "Now why don't you boys move along before the marshal gets involved?" There was a tense moment when Olivia thought the cowboys might argue, but something in Donovan's steady gaze made them reconsider. With muttered curses, they dispersed, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Donovan spoke briefly to the Chinese man, who nodded gratefully before boarding the train. When he returned to Olivia, she found herself seeing him with new eyes. "That was kind of you," she said. He shrugged. "Wasn't kindness so much as decency." He extended his hand. "Jake Donovan." Olivia hesitated before taking it. "Olivia Lawson." "Now, Miss Lawson, if you'd be willing to share what's troubling you, I might be able to help. I know most folks in these parts." Something about his direct gaze made lying seem pointless. I came for a position at Hargrove's Mercantile, but it seems Mr. Hargrove has passed away. Jake nodded. Walter Hargrove, good man. His nephew Edwin's running the store now. Not nearly as well liked, but he's trying to keep the business going. The station master said he wasn't hiring. Edwin's a fool if he's not considering help. That store's too much for one man. Jake studied her for a moment. Do you have anywhere to stay? Olivia stiffened. I'm sure I'll manage. A hint of amusement crossed Jake's face. I meant no offense, Miss Lawson. I was thinking of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. She takes in respectable ladies and her rates are fair. I'd be happy to escort you there. The offer was tempting, but Olivia had learned the hard way that kindness often came with expectations. Why would you help me? You don't know me. True enough, Jake agreed. But I know what it's like to arrive somewhere with nothing but hope, only to find that hope misplaced. He gestured to her trunk. May I? After a moment's consideration, Olivia nodded. What choice did she really have? As Jake lifted her trunk with surprising ease, she noticed the leather holster at his hip and the well-worn handle of the revolver it contained. A man comfortable with weapons, yet he'd resolved the earlier conflict without drawing it. It was a contradiction that intrigued her despite herself. The walk to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house gave Olivia her first real look at Dodge City. The main street was a chaotic blend of establishments, saloons, and gambling houses nestled alongside more respectable businesses, while cowboys and cattle drivers mingled with townspeople going about their daily tasks. It was worlds away from the ordered streets of Philadelphia. It takes some getting used to, Jake commented, noticing her expression. Dodge is a cattle town first and foremost. When the drives come in, things get even livelier. Is that a diplomatic way of saying it gets dangerous? Olivia asked. Jake's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Let's just say a lady such as yourself would do well to avoid certain areas after dark. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house proved to be a neat two-story building set slightly back from the main street. The parlor was modestly but comfortably furnished, and Mrs. Holloway herself was a plump, cheerful widow who seemed genuinely pleased to have a new boarder. It's $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper, she explained. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, no coming in after 9, and no spirits on the premises. That sounds more than fair, Olivia replied, relieved that the room was within her limited means, at least for a few weeks. After she'd paid for her first week and been shown to her small but clean room, Olivia was surprised to find Jake still waiting downstairs. I thought I might walk you over to Hargrove's, he offered. Edwin can be difficult, but he's more likely to listen if I'm there. You don't need to trouble yourself further, Mr. Donovan. It's no trouble, and it's just Jake. There was that almost smile again. Besides, I need to pick up a few things myself. Outside, as they made their way back toward the main street, Olivia's curiosity got the better of her. What is it you do, Mr. Jake? A little of everything, he replied. I've got a small ranch about 5 miles out of town. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep me busy. I help the marshals sometimes when things get rowdy. You're a lawman, not officially. But Marshal Earp appreciates having someone watch his back during busy times. Olivia had read about the notorious town of Dodge City back east, and the name Earp was familiar. Wyatt Earp, the famous marshal, Jake nodded. He keeps the peace well enough, but one man can't be everywhere. Hargrove's Mercantile stood at the corner of the main street, its windows dusty and displays looking somewhat neglected. Inside, the shelves were haphazardly stocked, and the floor needed sweeping. A thin, nervous-looking man was attempting to organize a shipment of goods, muttering to himself. Edwin, Jake called, causing the man to start. Got someone here you should meet. Edwin Hargrove pushed his spectacles up his nose and eyed Olivia suspiciously. If you're selling something, I'm not interested. Miss Lawson came all the way from Philadelphia because your uncle offered her a position here, Jake explained. Seems the telegram reached her after Walter passed. Edwin frowned. Uncle Walter never mentioned hiring anyone, and I certainly can't afford help right now. Have you looked around lately? Jake gestured at the disorganized store. You're losing business because you can't keep up. That's hardly, Edwin began, but Jake cut him off. Miss Lawson came here in good faith. The least you could do is give her a chance. 1 week. If she can't improve things, no harm done. Edwin looked from Jake to Olivia and back again. And if she steals from me, she won't, Jake said with such certainty that Olivia felt a flush of gratitude, even as she bristled at being discussed as if she weren't present. I assure you, Mr. Hargrove, I'm perfectly capable and trustworthy, she interjected. My father owned a store in Philadelphia. I kept his books and managed inventory for years. This seemed to catch Edwin's interest. You have experience with bookkeeping? Yes, extensive experience. Edwin hesitated, then sighed. Fine, 1 week starting tomorrow, 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening with Sundays off. $3 a week, not a penny more. It was less than Olivia had hoped for, but it would cover her room and board with a little left over. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove, you won't regret it. Outside, Olivia turned to Jake. Thank you, I don't know why you're helping me, but I'm grateful. Let's just say I believe in giving folks a fair chance. Jake tipped his hat. I should get back to my ranch before dark. Good luck tomorrow, Miss Lawson. As she watched him walk away, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, but also a wariness born of experience. Men like Jake Donovan, handsome, capable men who seemed genuinely decent, were rare in her experience. And in her experience, appearances could be deceiving. The next morning, Olivia arrived at Hargrove's Mercantile promptly at 7, dressed in her most practical gown and with her hair neatly pinned up. She was determined to prove her worth, not just to Edwin Hargrove, but to herself. The store was in even worse shape than she'd initially thought. The account books were a disaster of inconsistent entries and missing information. The inventory was so poorly organized that Edwin couldn't say with any certainty what they had in stock. And the dust was so thick in some areas that Olivia had to stifle a sneeze every few minutes. By midday, she had swept the entire store, reorganized one section of shelves, and begun to make sense of the chaotic account books. Edwin, initially hovering over her shoulder with obvious distrust, gradually relaxed as he saw the improvements. You do have a way with organization, he admitted grudgingly as Olivia created a new, more logical system for tracking inventory. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. I believe by the end of the week, we'll have everything in proper order. The bell over the door jingled, and Olivia looked up to see Jake entering, a hint of dust on his clothes suggesting he'd ridden in from his ranch. Miss Lawson, he greeted her with a nod. Looks like Edwin made the right decision. She's acceptable, Edwin said, which Olivia supposed was high praise from him. Jake collected a few supplies: coffee, ammunition, and oddly, a small bag of peppermint candies before approaching the counter. As Edwin tallied his purchases, Jake turned to Olivia. How are you finding Dodge City so far? It's certainly different from Philadelphia, she replied diplomatically. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's one way of putting it. If you're not too tired after work, I thought you might like to see a bit more of the town. The respectable parts, he added, as if sensing her hesitation. Olivia was torn. Part of her was intrigued by this quiet, competent man who seemed genuinely interested in her welfare. Another part remembered all too well her last disastrous attempt at trusting a man. I wouldn't want to impose on your time, she said carefully. It's no imposition. I have business in town anyway. Jake paid for his purchases. I'll stop by around 6 if that suits you. After he left, Edwin gave her a sideways glance. You do well to be careful with Donovan. Olivia stiffened. What do you mean? He's got a reputation. Keeps to himself mostly, but when trouble starts, he's often in the middle of it. Some say he was a gunslinger before he settled here. Was he? Olivia couldn't help asking. Edwin shrugged. Who knows, but a respectable woman shouldn't be seen walking out with a man like that. Olivia bristled at the implication. Mr. Donovan has been nothing but a gentleman to me. Besides, I'm perfectly capable of deciding for myself who is suitable company. The afternoon passed in a flurry of work, and by closing time, Olivia was exhausted but satisfied with what she'd accomplished. As promised, Jake appeared at 6, having clearly made an effort to clean up. His clothes were fresh, his face newly shaved, though he still carried his revolver. Do you always wear that? Olivia asked, nodding toward the gun as they walked. Out here, it's as necessary as boots, Jake replied, though I aim never to use it if there's another way. He showed her the better parts of Dodge City, the small church, the schoolhouse, and a restaurant called Delmonico's that apparently served the best food in town. "Would you care for supper?" Jake asked. "My treat to celebrate your first day of work." Olivia hesitated. Mrs. Holloway would be expecting her for the evening meal, but the thought of sitting in the boarding house parlor making polite conversation with the other lodgers was suddenly less appealing than spending more time with Jake. "That would be lovely, thank you." Inside Delmonico's, Jake led her to a corner table and pulled out her chair with unexpected gallantry. The restaurant was modest but clean, and the savory smells coming from the kitchen made Olivia realize how hungry she was. "Order whatever you like," Jake told her. "The beefsteak is particularly good." Over dinner, Olivia found herself relaxing for the first time since arriving in Dodge City. Jake was an attentive listener, asking about her life in Philadelphia without prying into obviously painful subjects. In turn, he shared stories about ranch life and the characters of Dodge City that had her laughing despite herself. "So what really brought you all the way from Philadelphia?" Jake asked after they'd finished their meal. "It seems a long way to come for a position in a small-town mercantile." Olivia toyed with her water glass, debating how much to reveal. "My father died 6 months ago," she finally said. "There were debts, significant ones. When the creditors were through, there was nothing left." Jake's eyes were sympathetic but not pitying. "I'm sorry." "Mr. Hargrove, the elder Mr. Hargrove, was a business associate of my father's. When I wrote to him explaining my situation, he offered me a position here. It seemed like providence. And now," Olivia managed a small smile, "now I'm making the best of things, as one must." Jake nodded, a flash of respect in his eyes. "That's all any of us can do." As they walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Olivia found herself studying Jake's profile. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. "Edwin said you were once a gunslinger," she said, immediately regretting the bluntness of her words. Jake's stride didn't falter, but something in his expression closed off. "Did he now?" "I'm sorry, that was terribly forward of me." After a moment, Jake sighed. "It's not entirely false. I've had to use my gun more than I'd like, but I was never what you'd call a hired gun." "What were you then?" They'd reached the boarding house, and Jake stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Someone trying to leave the past behind." "Just like you, I suspect." Before Olivia could respond, the door opened and Mrs. Holloway appeared, her expression disapproving. "Miss Lawson, it's nearly dark. I was beginning to worry." "I apologize for keeping her out, Mrs. Holloway," Jake said smoothly. "We lost track of time at Delmonico's." Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "Well, I suppose it's good you were in a respectable establishment at least. Good night, Mr. Donovan." The dismissal was clear. Jake tipped his hat to both women. "Good night, ladies. Miss Lawson, I'll see you around town," as Olivia followed Mrs. Holloway inside. She couldn't help glancing back at Jake's retreating figure. There was something about him, something that made her both wary and curious. And for the first time since arriving in Dodge City, she felt a spark of something that might, if she dared to name it, be hope. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Olivia would arrive at the mercantile each morning, gradually transforming the chaotic store into a well-organized business. Edwin, initially skeptical, came to rely on her efficiency and bookkeeping skills. By the end of her trial week, he grudgingly offered to make the position permanent. "Same terms as before," he said, avoiding her eyes. $3 a week, Sundays off." "I believe my work warrants $4 a week," Olivia countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "I've reorganized your entire inventory, corrected years of bookkeeping errors, and increased your daily sales by nearly 20%. Edwin spluttered, but in the end, he agreed. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Jake continued to stop by the store every few days, ostensibly to purchase supplies but inevitably lingering to talk with Olivia. Sometimes he would walk her back to the boarding house afterward, their conversations ranging from books they'd read to their differing views on the rapid changes sweeping the nation. "The railroad's changing everything," Jake commented one evening as they passed the station where Olivia had first arrived. 10 years ago, Dodge was nothing but a few buildings and a lot of dust. Now look at it. Progress has its benefits, Olivia replied. Though I sometimes think we sacrifice too much in its name. Jake glanced at her with interest. Such as community, connection. In Philadelphia, I barely knew my neighbors. Everyone was too busy rushing from one place to the next. And here, Olivia smiled. Here, Mrs. Holloway knows exactly what time I come home each evening, what I prefer for breakfast, and probably how many stitches are in my stockings. Jake laughed, a rare sound that Olivia found herself treasuring. Small-town living does have its drawbacks. It's not all drawbacks, she said softly, meeting his eyes. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither had put into words. But before Jake could respond, a commotion erupted from a nearby saloon. A man came crashing through the batwing doors, followed by the sounds of breaking glass and angry shouts. Jake's posture changed instantly, his hand moving to his holster. "Get to the boarding house," he told Olivia, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Jake, now, Olivia." His use of her first name, rare enough to be startling, underscored the urgency. She hurried away, looking back once to see Jake striding toward the saloon, his whole bearing transformed from the man who'd been walking beside her moments before. The next morning, the gossip at breakfast was all about the brawl at the Bull's Head Saloon. According to Mrs. Holloway, who seemed remarkably well-informed for a woman who professed to avoid such establishments, it had escalated into a serious altercation before Marshal Earp, and that Donovan fellow had restored order. 2 men were shot, Mrs. Holloway reported with grim satisfaction. "One may not survive. They say Donovan outdrew someone who went for his gun fastest thing you ever saw, according to Mabel's husband who was there delivering firewood." Olivia's appetite vanished. The Jake who had laughed with her, who had shared his thoughts on books and progress, seemed worlds away from the man Mrs. Holloway described. At the store, Edwin was full of the same news, though his version cast Jake in an even more dramatic light. "They say he didn't even blink when Miller drew on him, just had his gun out and fired before Miller cleared leather. Cold as ice, that one." "Was anyone killed?" Olivia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Miller took a bullet in the shoulder. He'll live to face charges." Lucky for him, Donovan wasn't aiming to kill. Throughout the day, Olivia found her thoughts returning to Jake. The man who had helped her when she was alone and desperate, who had secured her employment and treated her with unfailing respect, was also capable of drawing his gun and shooting a man without hesitation. How could those two sides exist in the same person? Jake didn't come to the store that day, nor the next. Olivia told herself it was for the best. Whatever attraction she felt toward him was foolish. She had come to Dodge City to rebuild her life, not to lose her heart to a man with a dangerous past and uncertain future. On the 3rd day, just as she was closing up the store, the bell over the door jingled. Olivia looked up to find Jake standing there, his expression unreadable. "I thought you might be avoiding the mercantile," she said, busying herself with the ledger to avoid meeting his eyes. "Not the mercantile, just wasn't sure I'd be welcome." Jake took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I expect you've heard about what happened at the Bull's Head. It seems to be the only topic of conversation in town." "What you heard," Jake paused. "It's not entirely wrong, but it's not the whole truth either." Olivia finally looked up at him. "What is the whole truth then?" Jake sighed, leaning against the counter. "Miller's had it in for me since I stopped him and his friends from roughing up that Chinese man at the station. He was drunk, looking for trouble, and when the marshal tried to calm things down, Miller drew his gun. I reacted. By shooting him. By stopping him from shooting the marshal or anyone else in that saloon." Jake's eyes held hers. "I don't enjoy violence, Olivia. But sometimes it finds you anyway." There was something in his voice, a weariness, perhaps, or a resignation that touched Olivia despite her reservations. "Edwin said you were once a gunslinger." Jake's mouth twisted. "I was a lot of things. Cowboy, scout, briefly a lawman in a town even rougher than Dodge. I've had to use my gun, yes, but I've never drawn first and I've never shot a man who didn't give me cause. And now, what are you now? Now I'm just trying to run my ranch and live quietly." He paused. Though lately I've been spending a fair amount of time thinking about a certain lady from Philadelphia. Olivia felt her cheeks warm. Jake, I understand if what you've heard changes things, he continued. A woman like you deserves better than a man with my history. A woman like me. Olivia repeated. You mean a woman who lost everything, who came west with nothing but hope and found even that was misplaced. A woman who's now working in a mercantile for barely enough to survive. Jake looked taken aback. I meant a woman of education and refinement. A woman who deserves security and respectability. Olivia surprised herself with a soft laugh. I think we both know that life rarely gives us what we deserve, good or ill. She closed the ledger with a decisive snap. What happened with my father taught me that nothing is certain. Not wealth, not position, not even the people we trust most. Jake's expression softened. What did happen with your father, Olivia? There's more to the story than debts, isn't there? Olivia hesitated. She had kept the full truth locked away, too painful and shameful to share. But something about Jake's steady gaze made her want to unburden herself. My father was a respected businessman in Philadelphia, she began, or so everyone thought. After his death, I discovered he had been embezzling from his business partners for years. All the comfort I had grown up with, our home, my education, our standing in society, it was built on lies and stolen money. Jake didn't interrupt, just watched her with those attentive gray eyes. When the truth came out, no one would help us. My mother had died years before, and my father's associates wanted nothing to do with his disgraced daughter. I sold what little they left me to pay for a train ticket west. Olivia smiled bitterly. I thought I could outrun the scandal, start fresh where no one knew my name. And then you found out Walter Hargrove had died, Jake finished. Yes, one more disappointment in a long line of them. Olivia looked down at her hands. So you see, Mr. Donovan, I'm hardly in a position to judge anyone based on their past. We all have histories we might prefer to forget. Jake took a step closer. Would you allow me to walk you home? There's something I'd like to ask you. The walk to the boarding house was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they reached the front steps, Jake turned to face her. Sunday is your day off, he said. I was wondering if you might like to see my ranch. It's not much, but it's peaceful. We could have a picnic if the weather holds. The invitation was unexpected. You want me to visit your ranch? I'd like to show you a different side of life out here. Something beyond the saloon brawls and dusty streets. Jake smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. Besides, my horses are tired of just having me to talk to. Olivia found herself smiling back. I'd like that. Sunday dawned clear and bright, with just enough of a breeze to take the edge off the heat. Jake arrived at the boarding house promptly at 10, driving a wagon rather than riding his usual horse. Mrs. Holloway watched from the window with obvious disapproval as Olivia climbed up beside him. Don't mind her, Jake said as they pulled away. She's just looking out for your reputation. My reputation survived Philadelphia, Olivia replied dryly. I think it can handle a Sunday drive. The land outside Dodge City was a revelation to Olivia. What had seemed flat and monotonous from the train window revealed itself to be a landscape of subtle beauty, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that rippled like water in the breeze, wildflowers adding splashes of color, and a vast sky that seemed to go on forever. It's beautiful in its own way, isn't it? Jake commented, noticing her expression. Took me a while to see it. When I first came west, I thought it was the loneliest place on earth. And now I can't imagine living anywhere else. He guided the wagon off the main trail onto a narrower track. My place is just over that rise. Jake's small ranch turned out to be a modest but well-maintained homestead nestled in a shallow valley. A sturdy cabin stood near a small stream with a barn and corral nearby. A few head of cattle grazed in a pasture, and chickens pecked around the yard. It wasn't grand, but it had a settled, peaceful air that Olivia found immediately appealing. You built all this yourself? She asked as Jake helped her down from the wagon. Most of it. Had some help with the barn raising. Jake looked around with quiet pride. It's taken 4 years to get it to this point, still a work in progress. It's wonderful, Olivia said sincerely. Jake gave her a tour of the property, showing her the vegetable garden behind the cabin, the spring that provided fresh water year-round, and the stand of cottonwood trees where he'd hung a rope swing, just because everyone should have a swing. Inside the cabin was simply furnished but surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, bookshelves lined another, and the furniture, though plain, was well crafted. What struck Olivia most was how clean everything was, not what she'd expected from a bachelor's dwelling. "I'm impressed," she admitted. "I had visions of having to clear away months of dust and dirty dishes before we could eat," Jake laughed. "My mother would haunt me if I lived like that. She was particular about keeping a proper home, even when we didn't have much." He prepared a simple but delicious meal: fried chicken, biscuits, and fresh vegetables from his garden, which they ate at a small table on the porch, watching the play of light and shadow over the prairie. "Tell me about your family," Olivia said as they lingered over coffee. "You mentioned your mother." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Not much to tell. My father was a blacksmith in Missouri. Good man, worked hard. My mother taught school until they married. I had a younger sister, Emma." Olivia noted his use of past tense but didn't interrupt. "During the war, things got bad in Missouri. Raiders from both sides tore through the countryside. One night they came to our town." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was 16, away hunting. When I got back, the town was burning. My family was gone. Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry." He shrugged slightly. "It was a long time ago. After that, I drifted west, did whatever work came along, learned to use a gun because I had to, eventually ended up here, and decided to stay," Olivia finished for him. "Something about this place felt right, like I could finally stop running." Jake looked at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "What about you, Olivia? Are you still running?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly. "I came to Dodge City because I had nowhere else to go. I'm staying because I have a job and a roof over my head, but I don't know if it's home yet." "What would make it home?" Olivia gazed out at the peaceful landscape. "I'm not sure that's something you can plan for. It just happens, I think. One day you wake up and realize you belong somewhere." Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Would you like to see the rest of the property? There's a spot by the creek I think you'd enjoy." The spot turned out to be a small clearing shaded by cottonwood trees, where the creek widened into a shallow pool. Wildflowers grew along the banks and birds called to each other overhead. "I come here to think sometimes," Jake said as they settled on a fallen log, "or just to listen to the water. It's peaceful." "It is," Olivia agreed, closing her eyes to better appreciate the sounds around her: the gentle gurgle of the creek, the rustling of leaves, the distant lowing of cattle. After the constant noise of Dodge City, the quiet was soothing. When she opened her eyes, she found Jake watching her with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You look different out here, more relaxed." He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Beautiful." The compliment brought warmth to Olivia's cheeks. "Hardly. I'm sure I look a fright after riding in your wagon for an hour, Olivia." The way he said her name, soft but insistent, made her meet his eyes. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Not just your face, though that's lovely enough. It's your spirit, the way you've faced everything life's thrown at you and still managed to be kind and honest." "Jake, I'm not good with words," he continued. "Never have been, but I need you to know that meeting you has changed things for me, made me see possibilities I'd given up on." Olivia's heart was pounding now. What possibilities? A future that's not just about surviving. A home that's more than just a place to sleep. Jake's hand found hers, his touch gentle but sure. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I've no right to ask for your feelings, but I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it." The sincerity in his eyes took Olivia's breath away. After everything she'd lost, everything she'd learned about the fragility of security and the unreliability of promises, she should be wary. And yet, sitting here in this peaceful place with Jake's hand warm around hers, wariness seemed far away. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Though Mrs. Holloway may need smelling salts when she hears of it." Jake's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Let me worry about Mrs. Holloway. You just think about whether you'd be willing to spend more Sundays out here with me." "I think I could be persuaded," Olivia replied, returning his smile. As they sat together by the creek, talking softly of small things and comfortable in their silences, Olivia felt something unfurling within her, a cautious hope that perhaps, after all, Dodge City might become more than just another stopping place in a life of constant motion. Over the next few weeks, Jake courted Olivia with a quiet determination that gradually wore down her defenses. He didn't make grand gestures or extravagant promises. Instead, there were small, thoughtful acts: wildflowers left on the mercantile counter, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a comfortable silence shared on Mrs. Holloway's porch as the evening light faded. Mrs. Holloway, after initial skepticism, had reluctantly accepted Jake as a regular visitor. "At least he takes his hat off indoors and doesn't track mud on my carpets," she conceded to Olivia. "And he does seem to have genuine feelings for you, dear." At the mercantile, business improved steadily under Olivia's management. Edwin, recognizing her value, had gradually ceded more responsibility to her, until she was effectively running the store while he focused on expanding their wholesale connections with businesses in larger towns. "You have a head for commerce," he told her one day, reviewing the monthly accounts she'd prepared. "Better than Walter ever did, truth be told." It was high praise from the normally taciturn man, and Olivia accepted it with quiet pride. The work was demanding, but satisfying, a far cry from the ornamental education she'd received as a merchant's daughter in Philadelphia, where she'd been trained in music and watercolors rather than practical business skills. Each Sunday, weather permitting, Jake would arrive at the boarding house to take her to his ranch. Sometimes they would ride out to explore the surrounding countryside, Olivia becoming more confident on horseback under Jake's patient instruction. Other times they would simply sit on his porch, reading aloud to each other or talking about their hopes for the future. It was during one such Sunday, as autumn painted the prairie in russet and gold, that Jake showed her the addition he'd been building onto his cabin, a second bedroom with large windows overlooking the creek. "I thought it might make a nice sewing room or study," he said casually, though something in his expression suggested deeper meaning. Olivia ran her hand over the smooth wooden windowsill. "It's lovely. The light is perfect. I was hoping you'd think so." Jake moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him but not touching. "Olivia, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes. These past months getting to know you, spending time with you, they've been the happiest of my life." Jake took her hands in his. "I know I'm not the kind of man your father would have chosen for you. I don't have wealth or position. But I can offer you a home, my protection, and my heart, if you'll have it." Olivia felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Jake smiled, a touch of nervousness in his expression. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Olivia Lawson. If you'll make a home with me here and let me try, every day, to be the man you deserve." For a moment, all the caution that had become second nature to Olivia rose up: memories of loss, of broken trust, of hard-learned lessons about the temporary nature of happiness. But looking into Jake's steady gray eyes, she found something she'd almost stopped believing in: certainty. "Yes," she said, her voice clear despite the tears now flowing freely. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jake Donovan." His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened as Olivia's arms went around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this," he whispered. "I'll spend every day making sure of it." They were married 2 weeks later in Dodge City's small church, with Mrs. Holloway sniffling into her handkerchief and Edwin Hargrove standing awkwardly as Jake's best man. Marshall Earp made an appearance, tipping his hat to the bride and offering Jake a hearty handshake. Even the local newspaper took notice, running a small item about "one of our most eligible ranchers taking a bride." The wedding night was a revelation for Olivia. Jake was as gentle and considerate a lover as he was a man, guiding her through unfamiliar territory with patience and tenderness. In his arms, she discovered aspects of herself she'd never known: passion, abandon, a capacity for joy that overwhelmed her careful restraint. "You're trembling," Jake murmured, holding her close as they lay tangled in the sheets of what was now their bed. I'm happy, Olivia replied, resting her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. I didn't know I could be this happy. Jake's arm tightened around her. Get used to it, Mrs. Donovan. I aim to make you happy for a long, long time. Life as a rancher's wife proved to be both more challenging and more rewarding than Olivia had anticipated. The isolation that had initially seemed peaceful sometimes weighed on her, especially during the winter months when snow made the trip to town difficult. But there was also a deep satisfaction in building a life together, in seeing the results of their shared labor. Jake taught her to ride properly, to shoot a rifle, though she hoped never to need the skill and the basics of ranch management. In return, Olivia brought order and comfort to their home, planted a larger vegetable garden, and kept the books for the ranch with the same efficiency she'd shown at the mercantile. They still made the trip to town once a week for supplies, and so Olivia could help Edwin with the more complex aspects of the store's accounting. Mrs. Holloway always welcomed them warmly, insisting they stay for tea and catching Olivia up on all the town gossip. It was during one such visit, as spring began to soften the harsh edges of winter, that Olivia first suspected she might be expecting a child. She'd been unusually tired for weeks, and certain foods that she normally enjoyed now turned her stomach. Mrs. Holloway, with her sharp eyes, noticed immediately. You're glowing, dear, she said as they sat in her parlor, and you've hardly touched your tea. Anything you'd like to share? Olivia blushed. I'm not certain yet. I haven't told Jake. Mrs. Holloway patted her hand. Men can be remarkably oblivious about such things, but mark my words, that husband of yours will be over the moon. That evening, as they rode back to the ranch in their wagon, Olivia gathered her courage. Jake, I have something to tell you. He glanced at her, a slight furrow between his brows. Is everything all right? You've been quiet today. Everything is wonderful. Olivia took a deep breath. I believe I'm going to have a baby, our baby. Jake pulled the wagon to an abrupt halt, turning to look at her with an expression of such naked wonder that tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. A baby, he repeated, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. You're sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. It's early still, but all the signs are there. For a moment, Jake seemed unable to speak. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. A baby, he said again, his voice muffled against her hair. Our baby. When he pulled back, Olivia was startled to see tears in his eyes. Jake. I never thought I'd have a family again, he said simply. After losing everyone, I stopped letting myself hope for it, and now you've given me that hope back. We're giving it to each other, Olivia corrected gently, placing her hand over his. Our family. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into autumn. Jake became even more protective, insisting on handling the more strenuous ranch chores himself, despite Olivia's protests that she wasn't an invalid. He also began working on a cradle, carving it by hand in the evenings as they sat by the fire. My father made one for my sister, he explained as his knife shaped the soft pine. It's a tradition, I suppose, something I can give our child that's made with love. Olivia, her sewing basket beside her as she worked on tiny garments, smiled at the tenderness in his voice. You're going to be a wonderful father, Jake Donovan. I hope so. His hands stilled for a moment. I want to be the kind of man our child can be proud of. You already are, Olivia assured him. The kindest, most honorable man I've ever known. Jake's smile was wry. I've made mistakes, Olivia, done things I'm not proud of. We all have, she reminded him. It's what you do now that matters. As winter approached, and Olivia's time drew near, Jake insisted on bringing a doctor from Dodge City to stay at the ranch. Dr. Graham was an elderly, experienced physician who had delivered most of the children in Ford County over the past 30 years. First babies can be unpredictable, he told Jake firmly. And with the weather turning, I don't want to risk being unable to reach you when the time comes. So Dr. Graham moved into the spare bedroom, the one Jake had built with such hope months earlier, and settled in to wait. Olivia found his presence reassuring, especially as the baby's movements became stronger and more frequent. The labor began on a clear December morning, just as the sun was cresting the horizon. Jake, who had barely slept for weeks in anticipation, was immediately alert at Olivia's first sharp intake of breath. "Is it time?" he asked, his voice calm despite the worry in his eyes. Olivia nodded, unable to speak through the contraction. Jake was instantly in motion, calling for Dr. Graham and helping Olivia to a more comfortable position. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination for Olivia. Jake never left her side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement even when she gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her as the labor intensified. "You can do this, Olivia. I'm right here with you." Just as the winter sun was setting, casting long golden rays through the bedroom window, their son was born a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair, and when he finally opened them, his father's gray eyes. "He's perfect," Jake whispered, cradling the swaddled infant with hands that had once been so quick to draw a gun now gentle with new life. Perfect, just like his mother. Exhausted but filled with a joy that transcended her physical discomfort, Olivia watched her husband hold their child. The look of wonder on Jake's face, the tenderness with which he touched their son's tiny fingers, filled her heart to overflowing. "What shall we call him?" she asked softly. Jake considered for a moment. "What about Thomas after your father, with Joseph as a middle name for my father?" The suggestion brought tears to Olivia's eyes. Despite everything her father's mistakes, the scandal, the loss of their family fortune, Jake understood that there had been love there too. "Thomas Joseph Donovan," she said, testing the name. "It sounds right. Then that's who he'll be." Jake placed their son in her arms, then sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Olivia's shoulders. "Our family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Something I thought I'd never have again." As little Thomas nursed for the first time, Olivia leaned against Jake's solid warmth and felt a sense of completion she'd never imagined possible. From the ruins of her old life, something precious and enduring had emerged, not just survival, but a genuine happiness built on love and trust. "I love you," she told Jake, the words seeming inadequate for the depth of her feeling. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You and Thomas are everything to me, everything." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. But inside their small cabin, warmth and love created a sanctuary against the winter cold, a home in the truest sense of the word. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Thomas thrived, a happy, sturdy baby who delighted in the world around him. Jake expanded the vegetable garden and added a few more head of cattle to their small herd, while Olivia divided her time between caring for Thomas and helping with the ranch's accounts. One morning, as they sat on the porch enjoying the mild weather, Thomas napping in his cradle beside them, Jake brought up a subject they discussed intermittently over the winter. "I've been thinking about Edwin's offer," he said, referring to Edwin Hargrove's proposal that they buy into the mercantile as partners. "It might be a good opportunity." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "The store is doing well, and Edwin isn't getting any younger. He mentioned again last month that he'd like to retire in a few years. It would mean spending more time in town," Jake pointed out, "maybe eventually getting a place there, at least for part of the week. Are you ready for that?" Olivia asked, knowing how much Jake valued the peace and privacy of their ranch. He smiled, reaching over to touch Thomas's cheek gently. "I'm ready for whatever gives our family the best future. The ranch is doing well, but diversifying makes sense, and you miss the work, don't you?" Olivia couldn't deny it. While she loved her life at the ranch and her role as a mother, she did miss the challenges of running the store. "I do sometimes, but our life here is good, Jake. I don't want you to think I'm unhappy. I know you're not." Jake took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "That's not what this is about. It's about building something together that can grow as our family grows, something we can pass on to Thomas one day if he wants it." The thought of their son's future, of the opportunities they might create for him, filled Olivia with a mixture of hope and determination. "Then I think we should do it. Become partners with Edwin." Jake nodded, his decision made. "I'll talk to him next time we're in town, work out the details." The partnership proved to be a wise decision. Over the next year, with Jake handling the wholesale connections and livestock trades while Olivia managed the day-to-day operations, Hargrove's Mercantile became one of the most successful businesses in Dodge City. They eventually purchased a small house in town where they stayed 2 or 3 nights a week, dividing their time between town life and the ranch they both still cherished. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved nothing more than helping his parents with their work, whether that meant arranging cans on the Mercantile's lowest shelves or solemnly handing tools to his father as Jake repaired fences or tended to the livestock. Life wasn't without its challenges. There were difficult seasons on the ranch, illnesses that left them all exhausted, and the occasional clash with those who remembered Jake's quicker days and thought to test him. But through it all, their partnership in business, in parenthood, in life remained steadfast. On the evening of their 3rd wedding anniversary, after Thomas had been tucked into bed in their townhouse with Mrs. Holloway keeping watch over him, Jake took Olivia to dinner at Delmonico's, just as he had on that first evening years ago. "Do you remember what you were thinking that night?" he asked as they lingered over dessert. "When I invited you to dinner." Olivia smiled, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I was thinking that you were either the most decent man I'd ever met or the most dangerous," Jake laughed softly. "And now I know you're both," she replied honestly, "and I wouldn't change a thing about you." Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Jake stopped suddenly and turned to face her. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but he held out a small wooden box carved with the same careful attention he'd given Thomas's cradle. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate gold locket. "Jake, it's beautiful," Olivia breathed, lifting it from the box. "Open it," he urged. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, one of Jake, one of Thomas, framing a 3rd space that was empty. "I thought we could add to it," Jake explained, a hint of shyness in his voice. "As our family grows." Olivia looked up at him, understanding dawning. "Are you saying you want more children?" "If you do," he said simply. "Thomas is the greatest joy I've ever known besides you. And I thought I hoped you might want to give him a brother or sister someday." The love in his eyes, the hope in his voice made Olivia's heart swell. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "In fact, I've been thinking about it too." Jake's smile was radiant as he helped her fasten the locket around her neck. "I want you to wear this as a reminder," he said, his voice low and earnest. "A reminder that you are loved, Olivia, every day without condition or reservation." "I never doubt it," she assured him, rising on her toes to kiss him. Not for a moment. As they continued their walk home, Olivia's hand tucked securely in the crook of Jake's arm, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman who had stepped off the train in Dodge City with nothing but a trunk and fading hope, to the wife, mother, and businesswoman she had become, it was a transformation she could never have imagined. Jake had kept every promise he'd made to her, spoken and unspoken. He had given her not just a home, but a sense of belonging. Not just security, but partnership. Not just affection, but a deep and abiding love that had become the foundation of her world. In a life that had taught her to expect disappointment, Jake Donovan had taught her to believe in promises again, especially the kind you could hold every morning when you woke in the arms of someone who loved you completely. And as they reached their home, where their son slept peacefully and their future stretched out before them filled with possibility, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that some promises were meant to last a lifetime. 5 years later, the Donovan family had grown. Thomas, now a sturdy 8-year-old with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's quick mind, had been joined by a sister, Emma, named for the aunt she would never meet but whose memory lived on in the stories Jake shared. At 4, Emma was already showing signs of being as determined as her mother, with a streak of independence that both delighted and occasionally exasperated her parents. The Mercantile had expanded to include a second location in the growing town of Garden City. Managed by a capable young couple the Donovans had hired and trained. The ranch, too, had prospered, with Jake gradually increasing their herd and adding more acreage as neighboring properties became available. But perhaps the most significant change had been the slow, steady healing of old wounds. Jake, who had once been so guarded about his past, now spoke freely of his childhood and the family he had lost. The nightmares that had occasionally plagued him in the early days of their marriage had all but disappeared. And Olivia, who had arrived in Dodge City believing that love was a luxury she could no longer afford, had found in Jake's steadfast devotion a treasure beyond price. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching Thomas teach Emma to skip stones across the creek, Jake turned to Olivia with a contemplative expression. "I had a letter from Edwin today," he said. "He's finally decided to retire completely, wants us to buy him out." Olivia nodded, unsurprised. Edwin had been gradually withdrawing from the business for years, spending more and more time with his sister's family in St. Louis. "What did you tell him?" "That we'd consider it," Jake replied, "but I wanted to talk to you first. It would mean more responsibility, more time in town. And you're not sure that's what you want," Olivia finished for him. Knowing her husband well, Jake smiled, taking her hand. "I want what makes you happy, Olivia, always have." "And what about what makes you happy?" she asked gently. "This ranch, this land, it's part of who you are. I wouldn't want you to give that up." "I wouldn't be giving it up, just sharing my time differently." Jake watched as Thomas successfully showed Emma how to select the flattest stones. "Besides, the children are growing. They'll need more schooling, more opportunities than we can provide out here alone." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, considering, what if we did both? Keep the ranch, buy out Edwin, but hire more help for both. We could train someone to manage the day-to-day at the store, just as we did in Garden City. And split our time between town and here, Jake nodded thoughtfully. It could work, though finding the right person to help with the store would be crucial. What about young Peter Graham, doctor? Graham's grandson, Olivia suggested. He's been clerking for us part-time while he finishes school. He's bright, honest, and the customers like him. Jake's expression brightened. That's not a bad idea. He's got a good head on his shoulders. We could start training him right away, see how he does with more responsibility. As they continued discussing the possibilities, Thomas and Emma ran up to the porch, faces flushed with excitement. "Pa, Ma, look what we found." Thomas held out his hands, revealing a tiny field mouse, trembling but apparently unharmed. "It was all alone," Emma explained, her blue eyes wide with concern. "Can we keep it, please?" Jake exchanged an amused glance with Olivia. "I think that little fellow would be happier back in the fields with his family," he said gently. "But we could build him a safe place to stay tonight and release him in the morning." Thomas nodded seriously. "That makes sense. He probably has a mother worried about him." "Just like I would worry about you if you wandered off," Olivia added, smoothing her son's unruly dark hair. As Jake helped the children construct a temporary home for their tiny guest using an old wooden crate and some soft straw, Olivia watched the scene with a heart full to bursting. This was her family, imperfect, occasionally chaotic, but bound together by love and trust and shared purpose. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Olivia and Jake sat by the fire, talking in low voices about their plans for the future. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Olivia asked, her head resting on Jake's shoulder. "If Walter Hargrove had lived, if I'd never come to Dodge City." "Sometimes," Jake admitted, his arm tightening around her. "But then I look at you, at Thomas and Emma, at the life we've built, and I can't imagine any other path." "Nor can I," Olivia said softly. "Though there was a time when I couldn't see any future at all, when everything seemed so hopeless." Jake turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "And now," Olivia smiled, touching his face gently. "Now I know that hope isn't something you find, it's something you build, day by day, promise by promise. With someone you love," Jake added, leaning forward to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day. "Someone who makes every day worth waking up for." As the fire burned low and the night deepened around them, Olivia Donovan reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to the Wild West seeking merely survival, a place to hide from scandal and start anew. What she had found instead was a life richer than any she could have imagined, a business that thrived, children who flourished, and a love that renewed itself with each sunrise. Jake had taught her that love wasn't a luxury to be hoarded or feared, but a promise to be lived every day, a promise she could hold every morning when she opened her eyes to find him beside her, when she watched him teach their children, when she saw the life they had built together continuing to grow and change. It was a promise neither of them took lightly, and it was one they would keep for all the days to come.